All right, guys. So for today's assignment, I want to start off by looking at this chart that we looked at right before we left school. And this is our three forms of quadratics. We spent a lot of time going from standard to factored form. That was called factoring. That was where we used our big X, our box method, those sort of things. And we found out how to take standard form and break it down into binomials to find the zeros. We talked about standard form a lot and all the way back at the very beginning of the year. This tells us what a y-intercept is by looking out here at the very last number. And then within the last week or so, we've spent a lot of time on completing the square. Completing the square puts us in this form, which specifically tells us the vertex. Okay. We also yesterday learned a shortcut to find a vertex from standard form if that's all you're looking for, or an axis of symmetry. There is something we've kind of been missing, though. We haven't really talked about how to go backwards. And the reason we haven't talked about it is because it's something you actually already know how to do. We just haven't explicitly discussed it yet. So today we're going to talk about both of these movements. We're talking about factored into standard first and then vertex into standard next. Your assignment today will be on delta math, and so it'll look like this. Okay, this will be the first section. We'll have these, where if you look carefully and compare to that last chart, we are in factored form, and we want to go to standard form. Well, what does that look like? Ax squared plus bx plus c. So we kind of want to take these two binomials and that number out front and put them all back together. Let's talk about a couple ways you can do this. First, if you want, you can go ahead and distribute the negative 2 in at the very beginning. That's fine. What you cannot do is take it and distribute it to everything. It is not being multiplied by that second binomial directly. It is only being multiplied by this first one. If you do it twice to both binomials, you've essentially multiplied by a positive 4, which is not in the problem at all. The way you can avoid having to worry about that at all is just do the binomial first. And that's how I'm going to do this first one. So I'm going to multiply the binomials together. So my negative 2 is still all the way out front. I get x squared minus x plus 7x minus 7. Now, I could distribute now if I wanted, but before I do any of that, it's probably going to make my life easier if I go ahead and clean up what's inside that parentheses. So I have x squared. What I mean by that is this and this are like terms. Okay? When I combine them, I'm going to get a positive 6x. Something's on my screen. Give me just a second. Positive 6x. And then the minus 7 is on the very tail end. Now, I look at mine compared to standard form. I'm very close, except for I've got this parentheses and a number out front. Standard form doesn't have those two pieces. So, to get rid of that and to kind of evaluate this out, I now take this negative 2 and distribute it in. It gets distributed to all three pieces, so just do three separate multiplications. Negative 2x squared minus 12x plus 14. Double check your signs. Looks good. This should be standard form. If you want to check it, you can do so in Desmos, but I will be doing that on the next problem just to show you. This next one's a little bit harder. Speaking of which, this is what your second part of your assignment will look like today. It'll give you this. And again, it's asking you to go to standard form. Well, let's talk about what we're in. These parentheses, quantity squared here, number out back, this should all start yelling to you, hey, we're in vertex form. And it's asking us in the problem to go to standard. Well, again, standard is ax squared plus bx plus c. It means put everything back together. Okay. And when I look here, there's one thing I notice. I notice that in this vertex form, I don't have two binomials set next to each other to multiply, but I have this little squared thing. Remember what squared means. It means whatever you're squaring, you're taking that huge thing, whatever it is, and multiplying it by itself. So if we were to expand that squared symbol out, it would look like this. 5, x minus 3, x minus 3, plus 8. The plus 8 stayed the same. The 5 stayed out front. All we have to worry about is this x minus 3 expanded out. Well, now we look very, very similar to our last problem, to factored form, except we have a number out on the very end, which is why it's not factored form. It's just a different version of vertex. So let's tackle it the same way. Let's start our distribution multiplications. So 5 stays out front. We have x squared minus 3x another minus 3x, and then a positive 9. And then plus 8 out on the tail end. Guys, the one thing you really got to watch and be careful with, check and double check your parentheses on these. You don't want to be putting stuff in and taking stuff out of the parentheses without actually checking your math. My two binomials multiplied together, and everything that came from that stayed in the parentheses. The plus 8 just stayed out. The 5 stayed out front. Let's clean this up a little bit inside the parentheses. We have 5x squared minus 6x plus 9, because those are like terms that combine in the middle there. And then the plus 8 is a tag along. We can't start using this plus 8. Please, right here, don't look and go, oh, sweet, 9 and 8, add them together. Guys, it's still trapped inside the parentheses. We have to get it out from inside the parentheses before we can start working with it. And to do that, we are going to do our same step as last time, which is now we're going to multiply by that number out front. We have 5x squared minus 30x plus 45. And you'll notice I've dropped my parentheses now because I've done all the multiplying. Parentheses are just multiplication. So I've done all my multiplying, so I can drop those now. And finally, we can deal with this positive 8 out here on the end. 5x squared minus 30x, 45 plus 8 is going to be positive 53. And guys, that was a wild, long journey. So I would advise you to check your work. I have a lot of you getting on to me and talking to me about delta math, saying, oh, I'm just missing them, I'm missing them. You can check these, you can graph these and check them. So our original problem was 5 and then x minus 3 squared plus 8. So we had 5 x minus 3. You do your little caret squared and then plus 8. Oh boy, it disappeared. Oh no, it didn't. There it is. Okay, 3, 8, there we go. Now, you press enter, it'll open up a second place for you to graph. And our final answer we got was 5x squared minus 30x plus 53. 5x squared minus 30x plus 53. And voila, look, our red parabola went entirely away because it got covered up by a blue parabola. That means these two are equivalent equations, and our answer is correct.